Hey people, gather around. Today I'm here to talk about one of my favorite fan games. This is the Lecarde Chronicles, and it is the Castlevania game I've wanted since Bloodlines and Dracula X Rondo of Blood. It's long, it's hard, it's Classicvania. Yeah, I know, the Adventure Rebirth exists, but honestly, that one felt a bit more like a colorful, sparkly dessert than a true successor to those two early 90s titles. It was a bite-sized sweet reimagining of a pretty poor Game Boy entry. I had some fun with it, and I can understand why people dig it, but ultimately I feel like it pales in comparison to the Sega Genesis and PC Engine CD games. Of course, we also had a ton of those Metroid-style adventures, which are fondly referred to as the Igaverse games, or Metroidvanias. I just shuddered. A moniker I've always found a bit misleading, as he wasn't the lead on Symphony of the Night, nor Circle of the Moon. He was a producer on a lot of the other games in the series during his run, but his presence has always reminded me a bit of the way Keiji Inafune was just the Mega Man guy for a while, if you catch my drift. I enjoy the Symphony of the Night, or Something of the Something games, but I've always considered them to be their own thing, narrative canon aside. They're great, but I like the classic Castlevania more, the barbaric look of the characters with less of that silly anime tinge. Less fat, no filler, and totally just a personal preference. So, settle down, fanboys and fangirls. I like them, but they're just not the same to me. Surely, we can agree on that. Tangents and opinions aside, the Lecarde Chronicles by Migami and Company mostly delivers with this 2013 release. I've now played through it about 4 times, and the more I do, the more I love it. It's similar to the original entries in the classic series, where things are much more fun when some practice has been put in. Patience is often necessary to navigate these stages effectively. Practice and patience together make perfect. The Lecarde Chronicles introduces a new protagonist, unfortunately named Ephraim Lecarde. Ephraim just seems like a weird thing to call this guy. Yes, this story is based in Europe, but it isn't something that slips off the tongue quite the same way as character names in the official series. I'm a dumb Westerner. I need my Trevors, I need my Simons, and my Erics. They are just more memorable to me. The same can be said for many of the places in this game. If I can't pronounce it, I'll likely forget it. Migami are a small group of French developers from Paris, and it kinda shows. That isn't an insult or a slight, but it does become quite evident with the language used throughout this game, not to mention the pretty embarrassing translations. Mountains, anyone? Ephraim Lecarde is a knight of the church who first needs to visit a handful of environments once ruled by a royal family. This is set up rather well by a handful of townsfolk Lecarde will need to visit and revisit in order to unlock new areas on the map. It's important to note that this game rarely uses Castlevania characters from series canon. Nearly everything here is built from the ground up, and these folks over at Migami did a mostly stellar job here. I say mostly because a large amount of the music in the Lecarde Chronicles is borrowed and remixed from other games in the series. These reimaginings are fine, but the tracks often loop in a clumsy fashion, sometimes in a jarring way. Like, a tune will kinda just play out, then start up again. It's also not entirely seamless in between screens, where another piece will start in a very sloppy way. Overall, it's passable, but not great. Unlike the sound effects, which are crisp, clear, punchy, and match the gameplay perfectly. There are a few new tunes sprinkled throughout, but they are mostly comprised of royalty-free ambient pieces by Kevin MacLeod, an American composer who creates a ton of excellent, high-quality, free music. This isn't inherently bad, but the soundtrack rarely feels cohesive, neither structurally nor technically. It's inconsistent. Alright, with that picking of nits out of the way, it's now time for me to kiss this game's pretty little ass, while I it's swollen. The controls are spot on, with a few minor and major tweaks to the familiar formula. Firstly, Ephraim only gets knocked back when he is damaged in the air, meaning all collisions while standing or walking won't send him hurtling into the nearest death pits. Some might say that this isn't a true classic Castlevania due to this change, but it makes sense in practice, because this game gets downright cruel with some of the late game platforming challenges. And make no mistake, peoples, the Lecarde Chronicles is very challenging, and I mean it's tough at times, but it's also almost always fair. The omission of knockback when Ephraim's feet are firmly grounded adds a new level of complexity to the platforming, of which there is a lot. When completely powered up, our protagonist moves with the swiftness of X from the X series. From as early as the opening stages, the player is expected to make jumps that are truly harrowing. Oftentimes, the longer the participant waits around to think of a strategy, they will be met with an onslaught of aerial enemies, so the game forces you to act quick. This would all feel rather cheap if the design wasn't as good as it is. Every obstacle and baddie feels meticulously placed to a noticeable degree. This is platforming perfection, and easily the game's biggest strength. The controls are snappy and precise. Well, after you reassign the buttons through joy to key, unfortunately. There is a gamepad option here, but it was seemingly made by space aliens. Look, I don't want to use an analog stick to control my 2D action platformer. Ever. Nor do I think the top two face buttons on the controller should be used for jumping and action. A personal preference maybe, but I still think the stock layout is ridiculous. Once the buttons are reassigned for proper human sensibilities, the game plays marvelously. Ephraim picks up new permanent power-ups throughout his quest that range from offensive skills to maneuverability attributes. By the end of the game, Ephraim will have the agility of a superhero with his mid-air dashes, double jumps, and slide skills. The platform puzzles complement all of this with increasingly challenging obstacles and traps. Most of these new skills rely on a new MP bar, which makes everything feel balanced. This meter can be filled by green hearts, another new addition to the Lecarde Chronicles, which forces the player to be cautious and frugal with their new powers, particularly when it comes to the spinny whip, which is extremely useful, but requires a lot of energy. All of these new additions are accompanied by classic series staples, such as sub-weapons, which can now be upgraded a variety of different ways. Red hearts serve as ammo, green for special moves. Simple, yet effective. Meat is also strewn throughout stages to refill Ephraim's health, and nearly always when it is required the most. Again, a testament to just how well this game was designed. As you can clearly see, the visuals are pretty great. Some areas look better than others, but most of the time, the backgrounds look absolutely beautiful. Ephraim's walking animation looks a bit goofy, but I mean, this is a Castlevania game, so I can't be too harsh when it comes to that. Most of the many bosses are well drawn, but they are rarely animated in a fluid way. Instead, I found that most of the big bads relied on puzzle-like gimmicks to keep things feeling fresh throughout. Still, for every few visually striking antagonists, there is one that looks like a crude clip art drawing, like the spider, this rock monster, or the zombies who waft farts at our hero. As I mentioned at the top, these were all created for this game, so I give them props for that, but on the flip side, I can't really understand why anyone would make Death sound like an illegitimate fourth member of the Chipmunks. Alvin, Simon, Theodore, and Death. These handful of odd-looking elements can be overlooked simply due to how great the environments are. Yes, this bat looks like a cardboard cutout being swung across the screen with an invisible string, but just look at all the details in that band behind him. There are excellent, clever environmental obstacles to work out, as well as mazes, switch puzzles, and fairly hidden power-ups. None of these are particularly difficult, but I still applaud Migami for including them. They break up the usual monotony of jumping and whipping. This is a very long game, and these details in level design really save it from feeling arduous. Every single stage is relatively unique as well, which adds to the fun. The first third of the game takes place all over the countryside, before the inevitable, sprawling castle set piece. The Lecarde Chronicles is a varied adventure all around, and far from boring. I could honestly rant and rave about this game for days, but that would mean spoiling the experience for people who are potentially interested in playing this, and I do think everyone should play and support this thing. So, without spoiling anything, I'd just like to toss out a few things that I really enjoyed. Firstly, when the player puts the cursor over an area that can be explored from the map screen, it shows all of the available items in that level. The ones that have been collected are grayed out. This seems like a tiny point, but I think it works well to keep things moving at a brisk pace. Players won't be canvassing an area over and over looking for goodies if they know they have gathered everything. Nice touch. Secondly, and I skirted around this earlier, but I can't give these developers enough credit for the way that they constructed this game from the ground up. They could have taken the easy way out and molded the story and characters around the tried and true elements of the past. Instead, Migami fashioned something familiar but ultimately unique. There's a ton of artistic talent on display here, and I can't even begin to imagine how much time went into putting out this free experience. Finally, I just want to compliment the level design and gameplay mechanics once again. There are dozens of levels in this very long adventure, and all of them are as varied as they are fair, except for this small, wretched area. I mean, that's saying something when a game this long has only one small smattering of bullshit. And it is bullshit, but it's just a bit of bull. Pretty remarkable. There are a few extras like a boss rush mode, optional difficulty settings, and a variety of endings as well, making this a complete Castlevania package. Now, with all of that having been said, there are a couple of things that I'd like to see improved. The music could have been dealt with better in-game. I already covered that. Also, some of the later stages have some unforgiving checkpoints. Sometimes it forces the player to redo entire puzzle sections over and over again. My solution would be to have a few shortcuts here and there, as in, you've just completed a lengthy maze. Why not have an unlockable door or some sort of simple pass-through to skip over them, at least until the next game over? The player is given a finite number of lives to complete a stage. Why not reward them for completing a room? It gets a bit arduous to have to redo a series of puzzles every time. There is a sequel. I've put some time into it, and I'm happy to say that all of my issues were fixed. But that's a topic for another time, because I definitely have some opinions about the Lecarde Chronicles 2. The sequel. Hopefully they found the time to fix these terrible stairs.